Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Russ Mayers, and I work with Associate Dean Helbig to organize and offer the discipline seminars. Thank you for joining us today for the Writing in the Disciplines workshop. Our moderator today is Cory Holding from the Department of English, who's also the instructor for the seminar. So I will now turn it over to Cory.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you so much all for being here. I see a couple of WID participants, and thank you so much to our panelists for today for being willing to share your work in the seminar with everyone. So, welcome all. And our aim today is just to give you a snapshot of the Writing in the Disciplines seminar, whose central project is basically supporting you in supporting your students' skill development and disciplinary thinking through the teaching of writing. To kick us off today, I will just briefly share a bit about who this seminar might be especially for and the kinds of things that you could bring to the space to work with. And then I'll turn the floor over to our panelists who will share the projects that they worked on in the seminar and what they were able to make. And we'll just close with a bit of conversation, your questions, and anything you might like to know about our shared work. So to begin, I will just share a bit about who the workshop is for. And I like to think that the Writing in the Disciplines faculty seminar is for everyone. It is perhaps especially for those who might be revising or refreshing an existing course, a course that maybe you've taught for a while, or you've taken over and might like to revise. For those revising an assignment or sequence to work better, whatever that might mean for you, or to better align with your course objectives. WID is for those who might be designing a new course from relative scratch that in some fashion includes writing by way of disciplinary thinking. It's for folks who might be integrating writing into a non-writing course for the first time. And for those who might be teaching a writing intensive course for the first time. And who might be looking to get a sense of writing pedagogy more broadly. WID is for those wanting maybe to develop scaffolding for complex thinking and writing tasks within a course. And for those adapting courses to new modalities or audiences. Writing in the Disciplines can also serve people who are curious about writing pedagogy and Writing in the Disciplines approaches more broadly. And one of the reasons that I am so grateful to be part of this space is because it is a wonderful space of pedagogical colloquy. We really think together about what we're trying to do through writing, and we support one another's goals for the teaching of writing. We really think through problems and challenges together, and it can be a very inspiring place to think and learn together about teaching. Some of the projects that you might bring, or that, some of the things that people choose to work on in the seminar include revising or composing a major assignment in your course or an assignment sequence. The seminar can support your aligning writing assignments with course objectives or tinkering with those alignments. The seminar can help you to expand informal or low stakes writing activities as part of the scaffolds for your major writing activities or the core thinking in your course. And the seminar can help you to design assessment instruments or schemes, including rubrics. As part of that, you can work on developing efficient and instructive feedback strategies, ways of responding to student writing that help the students to grow their writing and thinking. And you can work on integrating peer review and other writing support strategies into a course. You can work on connecting writing to disciplinary research methods. We'll hear a little bit about that today. And you can work on creating multimodal or digital writing assignments in the space. And over all of that, our project is really to guide student engagement and student disciplinary thinking, learning, understanding through writing. So, I'll stop there for now. Very happy to catch your questions after we hear from the panelists. But I'd like very briefly just to introduce our panelists for today. First, we'll hear from Andrew Lotz from Political Science, who joined the seminar to revise a political theory capstone course by shifting away from a traditional research essay toward creative making and a portfolio-based model. He also experimented with assessment practices as part of that. Andrew's teaching more broadly explores the intersection of pop culture and politics. Young An from the Department of Biological Sciences revised a microbiology laboratory writing practicum with a focus on helping students practice scientific argumentation from their lab data, supported in part by peer review. Across her teaching, Young invites students to perform actual scientific research, and as part of that, to explore open-ended research questions. And finally, Elise Ryan from the Department of English developed a new course in writing in the disciplines called This Is Your Brain on Literature, which brought literature to meet science and explores the way that literary works make their own mark upon the brain. In this course, Ryan used critical making, experiential learning, and assignments that emphasize noticing and empathy to cultivate students' deep engagement with course texts. So thank you again so much, panelists, for being here to share your work. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I'm excited to talk about sort of what I did and where it went and came from. I um, uh, engaged in the Writing in the Disciplines workshop because I knew that I wanted to revise what I was doing with my capstone. When I started it, I was thinking I would do it topically, but I actually ended up sticking with the same topic and building out like the practices that reinvigorated things. Um, so, just real quick on what the political theory capstone is, so you understand what I'm talking about with the course I focused on. Um, uh, this is Abraham Bosset's Reunion de Dames, which is like a image of a French salon, and that was kind of always the goal of what a political theory capstone should be. Is everybody committed to, hey, if we all have done the same thinking and done the same reading, we can show up and talk about a topic in a really productive way and a meaningful way. And so that's what we aim for in political theory capstones. They're our smallest course in the department. Students can only take them when they're a senior. They are capped at 16 students. And for a major that has 550 plus majors, it's an endeavor to get all the capstones rolling and going. But it's important that we keep them that size. Um, the historic model of them has always been and this is kind of what I inherited when I moved in the department was, well, what a capstone is the students write their most impressive research paper they've ever written, and that's what a capstone is. And that's fine and dandy, and a lot of my colleagues have an awesome version of that they are teaching this semester. But in my subdiscipline of political theory, that isn't exactly the best thing for us. So I wanted to think about what it meant to make a meaningful capstone as part of this process in writing in the disciplines. And I wanted to move beyond sort of the buzzword. We throw this around a lot, and my experience when I'm teaching a capstone hat. I work in the dean's office. I'm an assistant dean of academic program development, and let me tell you, everyone when they pitch a new idea for a new certificate includes a capstone because we all tell each other, well, everything's got to have a capstone. But what the heck is it? Um, Thinking about what we're doing in political science, about one-third of our majors go into law. They go into law school, and two-thirds go into what we might describe as the policy process. And so every single one of them, regardless of what role they take in those spaces, they are signing up for a career of writing. They are signing up to write for the rest of their lives. They're going to be writing reports, writing briefs, writing emails, generating productive content is a huge part of what everyone does. Speech writing, the whole nine yards. And I thought really carefully with the Writing of the Disciplines project about how am I helping my students transition from college to the spaces where their careers are, and saying to them, yeah, you've been writing this whole time in all your poli sci classes because that's all you're going to do the rest of your life, right? That is what we do as a discipline, is we generate ideas. We are a productive discipline. And we might be writing with data, we might be writing with image, we might be writing in terms of preparing spoken content, but still at the core of it's the writing practice. And so I thought really carefully about a capstone that focused on writing as a practice and generating buy-in amongst students to rethink the role that writing has in their lives. Because at this point of a college senior, writing for them is kind of sometimes an adversary. I hope not. I hope that lots of students don't view it as an adversary, but they probably, because of the way that writing has been assigned to them, they've had some adversarial relationships with writing. And so this was an attempt to think of that differently. Um, and so the Writing of the Disciplines program was really valuable for me because it was a space to do three things. It was a space to make changes. So I need a deadline to do stuff, and this gave me a deadline. And so it's worth doing just to get an artificial deadline for revising a course, FYI. I thought it was great for that. But it's that space to make those changes, to be empowered to say, I'm going to rethink what this is, what I'm doing, and I have people holding me accountable for that. It's a space to grow innovations. One of the nice things about the Writing and Disciplines process is that you get shown all the different possibilities and observe your colleagues working on those possibilities and really kind of grow out of them. And for me, the huge thing was learning from colleagues. I literally quote a colleague from my Writing of the Disciplines class in my syllabus to my students, still to this day. So Jennifer Hirsch from Psych said, we were just talking about what's the point of a capstone in our course, and I was talking about my project, and she said the thing that we can say to students, and then I subsequently include in the syllabus and say to them is they have as much experience as they've ever had as a student. That final semester of college, they're as experienced as they're going to be, most of them, in being an undergraduate. And many of them aren't going to go on to further schooling. And so that's like the last moment. They've been a student as long as they will be. And that means they know what it's like to be a student. They kind of have a sense of what being successful is. They know when they put in the work. They know when they're pushing themselves and when they're not pushing themselves. They know how to put together a successful term and how to take it off on a course and not do a course. And so the kind of innovation was like, let's trust that students, if we motivate them in the right ways, can have a good sense of themselves. And so they can respond to evaluation of writing, discourse, and engagement just as well as we might grade them. So this brought me into thinking about ungrading methods. And so we explored some of that in the writing of the disciplines process. I'm a huge fan of some types of ungrading, and I am a critic of other types. And so know that it's a complicated field. There's a lot of methods in there. But I really bought into the side of it that is about giving the students, if I want to show them that their life is going to include writing and that writing's going to matter, I need to tell them why we're doing the stuff that we're doing in the class. And so a big part of what I revised in this process was my own teaching practices and assignments and the syllabus, and just being open with the students and saying to them, hey, here's why we're doing this. You're writing this because it yields these outcomes, and here's my thinking on how this connects to your life. And that alone was new for me. And I found it to be very transformative, and I do it in all my classes in some sense. Um, it meant a lot of work structuring the student self-evaluation process. Students with support and guidance are really good at self-evaluation. The trick is they don't often get that support and guidance. And so some people, when they say, literally on my syllabus, it has a line in bold that says, yes, you will assign your own grade in this class. And then a page of here's why it's not that easy, and here's the steps you're going to take. Here's what I expect you to do, and here's why you're ready to do it. And that's part of the fun of this is convincing them, hey, you can do this and you can push yourself and you can grow by setting your own goals and then taking notes on the goals you've set and then meeting with me to talk me through how did you do on those things. And that meant finding meaningful assignments and giving students control in the processes that they did. Um, so instead of having students do here's the final scaffolded paper, which has its value, but that's a lot of political theorists aren't necessarily going to write research papers the rest of their life. And so I wanted to give them a variety of tasks that they could work on and to build out a portfolio. And so this is the set of things that I have them do during the course. Each of them included a lot of flexibility on what the students could do with them and take them in different directions to match their needs. I demonstrate a portfolio that's all on the same topic. So I pick a really obscure thing that I'm fascinated with, which is like space policy. So the policy of the laws governing the space outside of our atmosphere on Earth and how we use that and how we might extract from it and all that kind of stuff. And so I showed them how every single one of these items is like I can do a portfolio that's all about space policy by writing every one of these things on space policy. And so I like show them the examples of this. Of each of these items. Two of them, just to show you examples of what they are. I explore a lot of different forms of making. They do a podcast together, which still to this day produced one of my favorite student projects. I had a group of three individuals who presented as women who did a podcast that was like aping a sort of bro podcast. And it was like, like these sort of like fitness culture, political bro, your Joe Rogan experience kind of podcasts. And they like did a perfect parody of it, of the modes of it to parody the process of a podcast in the first place and why these get so politically relevant and interesting. So it's like awesome. But this is one, I have them do a public perceptions infographic. One of the keys of writing in political science is expression through visualization of data, of argument, of showing organizational structure. And so I wanted to make sure that they were practicing that. So if they work someday in, the Department of Agriculture, they can present their data, they can show these things. And so this is just one on the tension in media between how popular a piece of media is and how much it causes public confusion, right? There's like there are very realistic depictions of space in media, and there are very unrealistic depictions of space. And then these things might slide by popularity, right? And so that's just an example. I talked them through why that fit my portfolio, but then in our class meetings, we talk about what they're focusing on and where that might fit and what infographics might be helpful for them to build for a portfolio to show someone, yeah, I can do this. The other item we do is it's an amateurish curiae brief. So there's an amicus curiae is a friend of the court brief in legal writing. And we do an amateurish curiae because I'm not going to make them write a 500 page proper amicus brief, but they do a little mini version of the brief to give them like something in their writing portfolio that is a very formal piece of writing. And so outcomes from this, I've offered the course 3 times now. The quality of the work has greatly improved. So just as an instructor, it's way better to enhance the writing focus and to let students take ownership and control of their own writing in a class because they end up producing better content. They just make better stuff. Um, I'm still working on the right way to encourage free writing outside of class. That's been the hardest challenge. How to, why developing a weekly or daily writing habit will help them in their careers, will help them, get ideas down, will be productive time. Like that sort of like envisioning and thinking time is so critical to so many jobs, and people don't schedule time for that. And so I still haven't found the right way to do that, but I keep experimenting with it. I found that any worries, at least for me, about, oh man, will every student just give themselves an A? Nope. I've had a couple of those, right? I had a couple of students who they they two students greatly overvalued their own work and their process and set up very feeble goals for themselves. And did they wind up with a grade that probably isn't what I would have given them in if I'd been grading the materials? Sure. But the bulk of students were undercutting themselves. And in my final meeting, I needed to be like, hey, you did something impressive with this. This is pushing yourself. You really, I encourage you to think about taking a better grade for yourself. And it's been a fun process to learn how to do that. It shifts the labor in the course around. It doesn't make the course easier. I think it's more labor intensive to do a course like this. But it's really rewarding, and so it was worth the input that I did. And students really appreciate it. And it was without the writing and the disciplines as a space to incubate and innovate that I wouldn't have taken a chance on something like this. And now that I have, I'm continuing to love it. And I will talk to anyone and everyone about alternative grading methods and ungrading all day and every day. So that was my experience of writing the disciplines.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Young.
Thank you, Andrew and Cory. I am going to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Good. Awesome. All right. I am going to share my experience with writing in the disciplines workshop, and then what I learned and what I did, and then what I'm working on now. So this is more about peer review process that I've learned, from this seminar, and what I'm still working on. So here in when I joined this writing in disciplines seminar, I was assigned to this course called Biosci 1861, which is a writing practicum for micro lab course. So this is a basically a 1 credit writing intensive course. So we have usually senior micro major student. So it's a pretty small class. So student here conduct experiment in its companion course in a Biosci 1860 micro lab, and then they collect data, and then they write this in a paper based on this data, and also their interest in a certain topic. So they're quite motivated, but they often arrive thinking this scientific writing is just record what happened, what they collected. So it's not about this the critical thinking process. They were not aware that this scientific writing is a true critical thinking process. Then after that, I've been teaching Biosci 1010, which is communicating in biological sciences course. So this is also writing intensive course and also capstone, so 2 credit, and we have a more student now here. So from 16 up to 24 per section. So we usually have this senior bio major student. So we have so in this course, our student read and analyze primary research papers, and based on that, they write a review type paper and also give an oral presentation based on that. What I found, many of our students, they are intimidated by writing itself and also presentation about this scientific research. So we faculty members in our department, we designed this writing intensive course, focusing on writing this in a review paper. So we start from this scaffolding assignment. So try to break this a final review paper into smaller components, such as introduction, experiment description, conclusion, like a reference list, etc. So based on that, student to build this full review paper, and in this process, we students serve as a reviewer, so that they provide feedback on their colleagues' draft. And then the students also use this peer feedback to improve their review paper. So in this process, they have a chance to revise their paper. But then what I found there, they don't really use this peer review they received to improve their writing, their review paper. And I was thinking how to make this peer review process better. So when I was in this writing in disciplines seminar with my colleagues and also Cory, I learned about the benefits of having this peer review process, and then our students have this in a system, but they don't know how to use this effectively. So I was thinking about this deeply, and then what I was thinking about our peer review process for scientific publication. So we, as a scientist, we have questions and then construct hypothesis, and then conduct experiment and collect the data, and then write this in a manuscript. And then based on, so we, of course, had a revision process, and then we send, our manuscript to a certain journal. And then there, the editorial panel, including this peer reviewers, they review our manuscript. And then we undergo this revision process based on their feedback, and then decision is made to accept or reject or re-revise. Then I want to focus on this peer review process. So we, as scientists and also author, we write this manuscript and then receive feedback. And then when we receive feedback, reviewers comment on our manuscript, and we have to write our response to these reviewers comment. But then I found that actually we didn't really have this process in our course. So I wanted to incorporate these processes into our courses. So this authentic peer review process that we had in our scientific publication process. So here is a framework to improve this student written communication skills, as well as oral communication skills through authentic practice. So as you can see, I designed a new assignment called the response to reviewer for this peer review on the first draft. So students have lots of opportunity to practice for this basic scientific writing in this scaffolding assignment. Before they have this high stakes draft, like first draft or final review paper. So they write this in a small assignment, so like introduction and the body part and then conclusion part, and then they have a chance to receive this in a peer review, and then a chance to revise their assignment. This is scaffolding assignment. So with this repeated cycle, students to improve their ability to write this to provide this constructive feedback, and also write this in a basic scientific article. Then once they build this in a full review paper, they are going to receive this in a peer review, and then a student to complete this in a response to reviewer assignment. So they basically need to reflect on every comment they received from their peer reviewer, so that they can improve this they can experience this metacognitive exercise. So then through this process, they will produce their final review paper, and then they will become a confident in a scientific writer. So here in this process, we more focus on student growth, not just in a final product or just their starting point. So this is actually what I experienced in this seminar when I work with Cory and my colleagues. During that time. So we more focused on growth and progress instead of just starting point or our just final product. So I feel more like comfortable with um, um, making my voice, and also making this designing like a new assignment, etc. So this is kind of what I wanted use this like growth system, progress system is what I wanted to incorporate into my writing course. So this is a sample of responsive reviewer assignment, from APA. So here you can see students first need to express their appreciation for the feedback they received from peer reviewer, and then they need to they need to provide their reasoning for every comment they received. So through this process, a student to learn this professional writing attitude, I believe. So I just want to talk about this process in a little bit more detail. So here is a peer reviewer. Student must address this component, so clarity of the scientific argument, and then data interpretation, and then the way evidence is organized, and also logical flow of this in a paper. So I provide more structured protocol and a rubric for peer review process. So now students say good job or well done. Instead of doing that, they can actually provide more constructive feedback or substantive critique. Then based on this peer review, the student to complete this in response to review assignment. So at this time, students serve as an author, so they must address every reviewer in a comment with their scientific reasoning. So they decide, what to incorporate. So what does that mean? They must explain the reasoning why they want to incorporate, reviewers in a comment. Of course, they can defend, their own choices when they disagree with, reviewers' comment with, scientific reasoning and also evidence. So this is where the deepest learning happens. So they can actually have a chance to think about their own, learning process and also thinking process in this assignment. So in order to support this, authentic peer review process, as Andrea already mentioned, and I also use this in ungrading method. So assessment is rewards growth, not just starting material or the final single product. So I evaluate the quality of feedback the student provide, and also the thoughtfulness of student response to reviewer. And instead of just looking at this starting material and then the final product, I check this meaningful change between draft. So what I've learned so far, students were able to examine, their own writing choices, right? So they can agree and they can disagree with, their reviewers in a comment. So they actually articulate, why they made, those choices with this scientific reasoning. So in this process, that they are able to build this, metacognitive reflection. And when they defend, their claims to their reviewer, they need to explain their reasoning with, a scientific, evidence. So this is the argumentation practice. So even before they revise, their paper, they actually have this, scientific argumentation process there. Because currently I've been using this ungrading method. So our grading system grades themselves are tied more to progress and then growth rather than this in a single assignment. So my students often take more intellectual risk, so they are willing to change, they update, their assignment, their work. And then they appreciate, the process itself, becomes their learning process. And ungrading is likely to raise, the quality. I don't have scientific data though. I'm sure that this ungrading method lowered student anxiety. And also, I found that student their attitude has been changed with this sharing about this publication process with the peer review process having this assignment. So students learn to treat their colleagues feedback as a resource, not just judgment or a verdict. So now they use this comment, and they are thinking about this comment, the feedback. So they use this skill in our course and also beyond for their future career process, I believe. So thank you. And I want, many of you join this writing in the discipline faculty seminar because it's really, really useful. I can tell you this is a really good, learning environment for yourself, and then you can learn how to teach, writing well in your classroom.
Thank you so much, Young.
Thank you.
And over to you, Elise.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to hopefully make sure this shares properly. Okay, great. So thanks again, Cory, for the invitation to be here, and to Andrew and Young for really inspiring presentations. Andrew and I were in the same cohort in writing in the discipline, so it's fun to be together again. And Young's example from the student with the Journal of Poetry and Psychology is particularly apt. So when I came into writing in the disciplines, as you see here, I was really thinking about close reading and targeted feedback in the English literature classroom. I brought in an idea for a new course. This is Your Brain on Literature, that I was going to largely develop over the course of my time in writing in the disciplines, really focusing on this being a general education level course and a writing intensive course. And that also pointed to some of my other concerns coming into writing in the disciplines. I enrolled in the spring of 2022, and I was in a transitional period in my own career. I was a visiting lecturer at the university at the time, and I also wasn't quite sure what was next. I knew I was in the running for a job full time, which ended up working out, but I didn't know if it would at the time. And I was also thinking pretty deeply and pretty seriously about what it meant to teach writing intensive courses in these general education requirement classes. So in English literature, that's our 300, 500 level course, which I love teaching. And of course, I would see so many students in these classes who were non-majors. So how to give them a deep and fulfilling experience that they could translate into their major field of study, but most importantly, into their lives. I was also rather aware of the fact myself that I was growing weary with the grading, that I was struggling to understand the balance between meaningful assignments and being able to comment on those assignments in a timely fashion and get them back. So I imprinted on Parker Palmer early in my teaching career. And so I do still believe that we teach from who we are. And I very much realized that I was in danger of becoming like a Chekhov character in the classroom and just kind of too focused. And I needed a little more space to think about providing writing feedback. So these are the goals that I took into writing and the discipline. And as you can just see visually from the slide, these are the outcomes, which were far more, which met my goals and expectations, and then did so much more. So with regard to the course that I developed, I will say a little bit more about it later in my presentation. I actually haven't offered it yet. So I'm going to actually talk with you about some of the deeper structures of my teaching that were fundamentally changed by writing in the disciplines. So an entirely revised rubric system for essay assignments. I too developed a new grading method, a modified contract grading system that I learned about directly from our packet of materials and conversation in writing in the discipline. An entirely new approach to teaching close reading that is malleable and that I can teach across all of my courses. So I teach it in my general education literature courses. I also teach it in my upper division historical literature courses. I have a new approach to scaffolding this writing in the classroom through a lot of targeted in-class writing that's also built on small working groups that I now develop. I put students in small groups at the start of the term, and barring any overt or conversational difficulties that might happen amongst them, which frankly has not happened yet, they stay in those groups the entire semester. So they build conversational confidence with one another. And that crosses in-class writing, parent share, and then things like peer review. I also developed amazing colleague collaborators, which I will say more about, and real solidarity in the value, labor, and effects of a writing-based pedagogy. And this was really, those last two were huge for me. I mentioned the things that I was thinking about personally, because having a community of people who were committed to their students, to their coursework, and to thinking seriously about the relationship between our labor as teachers and the outcomes we desire was just a balm to me personally and amazingly inspiring for my teaching. So the close reading exercises that I developed, these are just a few of them that I dropped into the slide. But one of the key takeaways that I had in developing a close reading suite of assignments for the This Is Your Brain on Literature course was that I was actually using a language of significance for my students, like asking them to find significant language in a text and giving them no way to understand what actually is significant and just taking that for granted. So I developed this 4-step process, and it takes at least 4 class periods to go through, because one of the undergirding principles is that close reading takes time, it takes attention, and it is slow. But investing in the slowness of the process will yield these high dividends in being able to have conversation and then to translate what you see in a text into language and writing. So we spend targeted time across 4 class sessions. And then we stop and we stick with one poem. As the case, I teach a lot of poetry. The course that I was developing was on poetry. So we focus on one poem across each of these exercises, and they are cumulative. They build up into, you can see number 3 here, but they build into ultimately free writing about the piece itself. And so students learn to recognize how some repetitions are significant and some are not. They learn key terms of the English literature discipline around figurative language, around form and content. They learn, especially in the later exercises 3 and 4, how to subordinate content. So making decisions, hard critical thinking decisions about, okay, I have these things that I noticed in this text, both of which are very important. What do I think is most important and why? And how am I going to subordinate the other pieces of evidence to this most important idea? This has been not only like transformative in the essays that I receive, but it's really fun to teach because we read aloud a lot. And this was my final presentation in writing in the disciplines, a read aloud, close reading assignment that had students really working with rhythm and gesture and the embodiment that reading involves. All of that is still a part of all of these exercises that I use in every one of my classes. And students get into it. They see the connection between the sounds that they make, their body posture, and the way that they think, and then ultimately the way that they write. Also coming out of this was my own version of a revised grading method. And as you can see on the second page here, I cite the unilateral grading contract to improve learning and teaching. I learned about this in writing in the disciplines. So this was part of our packet and I adopted it for most of my classes at this point. So essentially this model of modified contract grading is you set up terms of the contract. You can see some of them for my words and images course, which is a lower level literature general education course. And every assignment not only establishes what a student has to do, but why they're doing it, how it connects to other assignments, what counts as satisfactory completion of the assignment. And for doing the work at that level, they earn a B. And there are ways to go above that if they don't submit something or they're not sort of registering what is on that assignment sheet. There are ways to go below it. But that is all a product of conversation and feedback. So I'll also echo Andrew's point that this is transformative and it gives students so much agency over their work. They also see, in my experience, how scaffolding works and how cumulative our courses often are and how their assignments fit together. And I can testify to real growth across courses. It doesn't necessarily reduce our labor or theirs. So if this is something you're thinking about and maybe have anxieties on that topic, it's still quite rigorous. I also wanted to say a few words about colleague collaborators that I'm so grateful for coming out of my cohort of writing in the disciplines. So that class that I took in, that I wanted to build, This Is Your Brain on Literature, I actually ended up collaborating with another member of the cohort, Dr. Michelle Colvin, who is in psychology. And she and I together proposed a course that we submitted for the Humanities Center Co-Teaching Award. We ultimately did not get it, so did not offer the course, but that course is amazing. And working with Michelle was really, really wonderful. And I needed her. Like, she was part of the missing piece of what I brought into writing in the discipline. Having that, dual force of her expertise in psychology and the cognition component with what I knew I could bring on the poetry side of things, it made the course so much more interesting, approach it from a different angle, and we'll do something with it eventually. I mean, we already have. The other collaborator that I've worked with from the same cohort is Sarah Moore, who teaches in the English department in our film and media studies program. Sarah and I have collaborated on multiple things, but most formally, Sarah was teaching a video installation course at the time. I was teaching a class called Secret Pittsburgh, and we collaborated on this unfolding space and language assignment. And I brought the class to her video installation that was in our university art gallery. And my students interviewed her students about video installation art. So we got a really interesting writing assignment from all of our students out of this, and a really interesting podcast assignment that came out of it on interviewing. So my experience with writing in the disciplines has began in 2022 and continues until this moment. It really was transformative, largely because of, again, the community that I encountered and just the sense of solidarity in practice and real inspiration and encouragement. So I encourage you to join if you haven't already. It was really one of the highlights of my professional career here. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Elise. And thank you all so much. And I acknowledge that we are toward the end of the hour. I just want to say that I warmly invite you, if you have a question that you're not able to pose during this session, to please feel free to email me. I'm just putting my email address in the chat. You can also find it. My last name is Holding, Cory Holding. But we have one question for Andrew that's been posed by Ellen Kelsey. Wonders for Andrew, if you give a full example or a more skeleton example of your assignments. Ellen is hesitant to give a full example because of a concern that students will not be as creative if they're trying to emulate something. Can you also speak to if you think this might be more or less the case with fourth year students versus young students?
Definitely a skeleton. Yeah, and I actually have a couple classes where the point is that the creative making, you kind of say like, listen, I'm not going to show you yet what other students have done in the past, all the possibilities of this, because I want you to be creative. I teach a propaganda class and they make their own propaganda, and I'm not going to say, here's what it looks like. Otherwise, they'll all just replicate that. And so, yeah, it's always very much like a skeleton example. So yeah, and the nice thing about engaging with them when they've bought into the written work being something that's meaningful to them, it like flips the conversation pretty well. So it's not nervousness about what do I have to do to make it right, but excitement about, oh, I want to make something that I care about and that's useful to me or valuable to me, or, I see the utility in this myself. And so that really helps with being able to say to them, like, there is no requirement because you're the ones who decides. So, yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for that question. To Ellen, it is the noon hour, just an acknowledgement. You may have to go to another commitment. I'm able to stay just a few minutes if anyone has questions that they'd like to pose in this moment. But otherwise, we really thank you so much for your time in being here and in listening. And I just want to thank again everyone who shared so generously today.